Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, great to see you today and happy to be here.
Same. This is a continuation of our podcast regarding the ISCM. So, Jeff, before we start any of these, I want to give the audience a flavor of who you are and what it is that you do. Who is Jeff Tennis?
Yeah. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been in the catastrophe modeling industry for it's a little scary to say, but almost 25 years. Started my career at a cat modeling firm and have been through insurance and reinsurance brokers, and now I'm very proud to work for Cincinnati insurance companies, where I help our company evaluate their insurance portfolio for catastrophic risk, but also help our reinsurance underwriters price treaty business.
Yep. So, this is a continuation of the ISCM. So, the second question I ask all the guests are quiz question, Jeff. What does the ISCM stand for? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's a good question. So ISCM stands for International Society of Catastrophe Managers.
Okay.
I know that's a
So,
bit of a mouthful, but
that's why we're going to say ISCM going
yeah.
forward. But very much in the spirit of this particular podcast around the ISCM is to build value around catastrophe modeling outside of just the voodoo that occurs that everyone thinks we do. Can you give can you give a little bit of a flavor of like what's your day to day? Like how you must have a team. What's your when you're doing this work like we before we hit record you mentioned one ones like so reinsurance like we know there's like two bottlenecks during the year where you're going to be exceptionally busy. What's life like as a catastrophe modeler or manager?
Yeah. You know what? I think that's one of the great things about this particular role is that it can touch so many different facets of an insurance company, reinsurance company, a broker. In my, I would suggest that my experience has been the job varies a little bit through the year. So I kind of wear two different hats. As a reinsurer, my peak times of, evaluating ceding profiles for reinsurance, that's going to really kick in October, November, December, and then again kind of March, April through June, July. So that's really getting into the weeds of, reviewing their exposure data. Does it make sense? Is it complete? Do we have good confidence in this particular seed and how they're running their business? The other hat is the insurance hat. So I help evaluate our portfolio for catastrophic risk. And that's taking source data and reviewing it, transforming it for catastrophe models. And the fun piece of that is that I get to work directly with in fact, as I was just on the phone today, talking with a policy wordings expert to make sure that, yeah, we've got all this data and I could make this decision, but does it actually make sense relative to the policy? And those are the kinds of conversations that I really enjoy having because you get the challenge of taking something, real, the policy, and making sure the data aligns to it. Um, and then the other thing, and this is one of the things I really enjoy about the ISCM, is that there's a really broad spectrum of different challenges I get to solve in my day-to-day work, whether it's property, whether it's cyber, whether it's we've got some AI initiatives. Those are all things that the ISCM is also doing. So I think it really just fits together really well for me.
Yeah. And one of the trends that I've been seeing is that, again, it's not catastrophe analytics is not just for catastrophe models. You mentioned policy wording. I'm seeing a trend where Underwriters want to learn more, and that seems like a natural one, but I think I'm seeing the trend extend further. I'm seeing private client brokers wanting to understand catastrophic exposure because their clients are exposed to it and they need to be able to speak intelligently about that. Can you talk about how the ISCM is solving for that trend?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, and I kind of already touched on this a little bit, but one of the things I think that really sets the ISCM apart for not just catastrophe modelers, although that's definitely a huge chunk of our membership base, but also just for whether it's a broker, like you mentioned, is the content that we offer on a near monthly basis. We have what's called a coffee talk. And I'll put a plug in for ISCM here. Those are free. So if you go to our LinkedIn page, we often publicize them there. But that content, it spans everything from cyber to property to wildfire to there. We had a conversation about Gen AI. I mean, all sorts of different topics that can really equip anybody in our industry, not just cat modelers. And if I could, I'd give maybe just one personal example. Um, we had Dr. Mark Hope of GC Analytics on a coffee talk recently, and he was going through wildfire exposure and how to evaluate and monitor accumulations, right? He pointed to an open source data set that I wasn't aware of. And the great thing about it, although that data set's incredibly complicated to use, we now have taken that open source data set and we're going to start using it in the very near future to understand, in total, how much do we have exposed to different wildfire regions. And that's something I wouldn't have known about otherwise. And it doesn't even touch a cat model, right? So I think there's just one of many possible examples of how the ISCM really helps equip anybody in our industry to elevate their professionalism.
Yeah, including the framework.
Mhm.
You know, I think actuaries have sort of like developed a particular framework, but it's so math oriented that it's only the actuaries that actually use it. I think the catastrophe modeling framework of hazard, vulnerability, and financial outcome, it allows all insurance professionals access to that because you can break it up into three pieces and you can begin to tell a story even if you're not an expert and even if you aren't using the numbers on a day-to-day basis, you can talk about, yes, you're exposed to hazard but your vulnerability is low, or vice versa.
Right,
And the thing with catastrophes, Jeff, is it's not just a property thing anymore, right? Like auto, some of the biggest losses for Hurricane Ian were auto losses
yeah,
as the floods were coming in, and those are analytics that you can use with modeling, but you can get an understanding for what your exposure is.
right. And I'd be curious what you think about this. I mean, don't you think so often you mentioned Hurricane Ian, you know, oftentimes in this industry we'll take a past event and try to make learnings from it. I mean, I feel like the longer I go through this industry, so often those learnings are maybe there's some exposure there we didn't capture or we didn't capture it quite right. I
Oh,
mean, what do you think?
oh, completely. So I live in Naples, so we were hit by Hurricane Ian, and being a catastrophe expert, I talked to a lot of neighbors who were saying, we were here during Irma,
Hmm.
not that big a deal. And it's like I knew no two storms are the same,
Right.
right? Like, and I've seen it. I lived in New York when Sandy hit. So in the year before Irene hit, and all of my neighbors are like, Irene came, nothing happened.
Yeah.
It's like it's the nature of, I don't think, when I train people on catastrophe exposure, I don't think they get a sense of how much small variables matter. How much, if Hurricane Andrew was 20 miles more north,
Yeah,
we're talking about potentially, 100+ billion dollar, event, like just a monstrosity. People don't understand that just small changes in the wildfire and the earthquake could have a massive difference in what the outcome is.
right. Exactly. I
It's
couldn't agree.
crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And now we're seeing like so like with catastrophes, you got cars, boats, like we're now able to like really think broadly about catastrophes and the implications. Like even Jeff, I had a conversation with someone where we were talking about islands, right? So, the islands here in Florida,
Mhm.
Sanibel, Cape Coral, right? You may not have any damage. So the model will say your highly engineered structure, you're going to be, you're 20 feet off the ground, you're going to be just fine. Not if no one can get to you, not if the bridge
Right.
gets wiped out.
Right.
So people are starting to say, like, what else can we do with these models? Oh, we can draw
Right.
rings and circles and see what the exposure is outside of just our unique property.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and even to that point, and we're kind of talking about it right now, but it's just I'll call it fundamental exposure management. And fundamental doesn't, by saying that, I don't mean to imply simple, but just really basic understanding of how much exposure do I have and how closely concentrated are some of my exposures. I mean, there's certainly tools that can help, cluster exposures and find kind of little pockets of dense concentrations that you may not always be aware of. So to your point, about islands, I mean, you can even find islands on land, right? Where you're finding, okay, I've got this whole neighborhood that if there's a wildfire here, I've got a real issue. So I think that's so exciting to take the cap modeling framework as a foundation, but then also build on top of it to really answer a more holistic set of questions.
And I almost think I think it's a great segue because you almost have to think that way as an insurance professional. Because Jeff, every time you think, oh, I fully understand this, you run into an event that punches you in the face. It says, no, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Right.
I was just reading an article. So this was supposed to be uh, the highest forecast hurricane year, right? It has not turned out that way. And to add insult to it, the the West Guinea tropical swirls that occur that usually are the seeds for hurricane activity, for some reason, meteorologists don't know, are floating north in the Sahara and they're dropping their precipitation, in the Sahara Desert, not forming hurricanes. Like every time we think we know, we run into these things like, no, we don't know. And that's why I think the catastrophe modeling exercise, the aggregate management exercise, the exposure management exercise is so useful because you can layer on I have, this is my full exposure, right? But
Right.
that could be like $1 trillion, right? Like I'm not going to lose $1 trillion. It's somewhere between 0 and 1 trillion. And that's where the art gets to like, okay, where in there? Where's that needle? And what's my confidence? What's the error around it? It's such a fantastic exercise for any insurance professional.
I agree. It's an art as much of a science, I think. And you just pointed out to some of those. I mean, you said it earlier, where it's just these small changes in variables, like the Saharan air layer, you know, just where that sets up, it's changing everything right
Yeah.
now. And is it going to stay that way? We don't know, but it'll be fun to watch it play
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. I have a saying, I'm going to take full credit for it.
Good.
In the room of wisdom, we're just dust on the floor. That's what we know. Like
That's a
we
good one.
think we know a lot because we're the little mites there. Like, wow, look at all this stuff that we know. We don't know squat, and we just keep getting surprised. So
I agree.
Jeff, finish off with ISCM. What's your role at the ISCM?
Yeah, so I help the ISCM with our marketing. I've got a great group of professionals that are a part of that as well. I think there's exactly. Mr. Nick Lamparelli is one of them.
The newest member.
And no, so our main within the marketing group, some of the main things that we do is make sure that one, if our members have questions, we respond to those questions. Make sure they have the tools and everything they need as a valued member. And second is promotion and setup of our events, whether that's our monthly or almost monthly coffee talks. We also have other virtual and hybrid seminars. So setting those up, making sure everybody can register appropriately. Those are really some of the biggest components of what we do. And also to take a pulse. And this is something that we're really focusing on more going forward, is getting a pulse of our members to make sure that our content aligns with what they're looking for. So that's certainly something that'll be on our radar more and more as our membership base grows.
Yeah. And it's hard to beat the price
It
to
is hard to
join.
beat the price.
Right.
Exactly.
So folks, you get the coffee talk, the webinars, sometimes in-person meetings. I understand that
Yeah.
we're trying to roll that out to the US, but London is kind of a hotbed, and London is like the insurance capital of the world. So
Right.
that makes complete sense. But for $100 to become a member of this, it's like you can't get an education anywhere else in comparison to what you get for that $100. It's well worth it. So, Jeff, thank you for illuminating us. That was very, very interesting conversation. I love your passion. It is an art.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can do this again soon. So thank
Okay.
you for having us.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff.